Hey friend, Chris here from WhyLogicProRules.com, the website that helps you get the most you can out of Apple's Logic Pro. Today, I want to touch on a question that I see crop up a lot online. And that question is in this day and age of Apple Silicon, is it still recommended or even relevant to save your Logic Pro projects onto an external hard drive? I think this is a great question because, in this day and age, in the year 2024 at the time of this video, the Mac lineup is Apple Silicon, and these machines are blazing fast. Plus, the internal storage is a solid-state drive, so it's just like fast on fast. Doesn't it make the most sense to save your projects to the internal storage of your Mac, since the read and write speeds are probably going to be way faster than anything external? And I would say, yeah, in most cases, that makes the most sense. However, I do have an argument as well that I think that external hard drives in the year 2024 are just as relevant as ever. Now, before I dig into why I think external storage is still a worthy investment, I do need to touch on why I'm bringing up this conversation in the first place. Well, the story comes from a number of years ago. There's a relevance here and still in pretty recent memory for a lot of us. But the reason is because at one point in time, computers, memory, and internal storage was pretty limited. And the hard disk speed inside the computer was pretty dang slow. Trying to run a digital audio workstation and read and write information and have processing, digital signal processing, and have all this stuff going on, for many of us, that's where the Mac broke down. That's where a laptop or computer, doesn't matter who manufactured it, it just broke down, couldn't handle that sort of situation. Now, by broke down, I don't mean literally broke, but instead, we get that awful system overload message. Just the memory, the internal speed, just couldn't handle everything that you might throw at it. So there are real limitations of working with a DAW on a computer, and thus saving your projects to a separate external drive helped free up resources, helped kind of spread the load. It was not a perfect solution, but it helped a lot. But in this day and age, again, of Apple Silicon and solid-state drives, it seems almost laughable to even suggest saving your projects, saving your sample libraries, your most important files on anything other than the Mac's internal drive. But external drives still matter, and I'm going to share with you a couple of reasons why I think this is the case. Number one, the limitation of disk space on your Mac. So what I mean by that is perhaps when you were pricing out the Mac that's perfect for you, if you just bought a Mac recently and you looked at the storage prices, you might have thought, $200 more for 1 terabyte? No, I won't be spending that money. Or maybe you looked at 2 terabytes and you're like, $600 more? No way. I'm not going for that. And I think that's very respectable. If you're focusing on budget, work within your budget. Another limitation of hard drive space is sample libraries, loops and samples and orchestral samples. And let's just say hypothetically that the internal storage on your Mac is 1 terabyte. Okay, that's a pretty good amount of storage. But the amount of samples that you have is like 700 gigs. That's probably a very conservative number for many of us, but just roll with it. So 700 gigs and just samples. Well, between the stuff that you have on your Mac in terms of applications and just saving files, and then you got this massive sample library that you're trying to store on the Mac, you're probably going to run out of disk space immediately. And that's another good reason for external storage. But the second reason I think external storage is just as relevant today as it was years ago and is still a worthy investment is for the purposes of backing up and archiving your Logic Pro projects, your sample libraries, and other associated files. Because when your projects are stored on just the Mac, or just in iCloud, or just in Google Drive, I'm going to be honest, it might as well not exist at all. I know that sounds harsh, but it's true. Because when you only have one copy of your projects and files, it just takes one bad day, one bad moment, one bad misclick of the mouse to maybe ruin your day, your year, or even years when it comes to your creative work. To get you started on the path with external storage, I want to compare the two most likely candidates that you'll be choosing between when it comes to either extending the internal storage of your Mac or for backing up and archiving. And that's the differences between hard disk drives versus solid-state drives. Why you might choose one versus another. Also, if the topics of file management, organization, future-proofing, versioning, backing up are things that have been on your mind for a while and that you could use a little help in, I've got something coming out next week that I'm really stoked about. I've been working on it for a while, so if you're interested, again, in file management and versioning and future-proofing of your Logic Pro projects, check out the description below this video. There's a link, and when you sign up on that link, you'll be the first to know about this brand new thing that I'm releasing from Logic Pro Rules. First, hard disk drives. This used to be the default storage system for most Macs, for most computers, until solid-state drives became cheap enough to install into a computer. Hard disk drives are mechanical drives. There's a spinning set of platters. They look like CDs, and then there's a mechanical arm that literally moves around and reads and writes information magnetically from the spinning platters. So it's very much a work in motion. So hard disk drives, the pros of this type of storage system in 2024 is that they tend to be pretty cost effective. You can get a lot of storage for relatively cheap as compared to solid state drives. So you could get like a 4 terabyte, 8 terabyte, 10 terabyte hard disk drive for way cheaper than it would cost for the equivalent solid state drive. However, the drawback of the hard disk drive type is that despite the amount of storage that you can get for relatively cheap, the read and write speeds of these drives tend to be slower than a solid state drive. And when it comes to your working drive, you're using this to store your Logic Pro projects and work on them from, read and write speeds are pretty important. Of course, you can purchase a spinning disk drive if you prefer as your active working drive. You just definitely want to look for a spinning disk drive type with a specification of 7,200 RPM, revolutions per minute. That's the rotational speed. They also come in other flavors like 5,400 RPM is pretty standard. You want a minimum of 7,200 RPM. The limitation then of a hard disk drive is the fact that it's mechanical. They have spinning disks, an arm that moves, and they can only go so fast. But this makes a hard disk drive a really great candidate for backing up and archiving because you can get a lot of storage for relatively cheap. This brings us to solid state drives. If you're looking for an external drive to save your projects, your sample libraries too, and you're going to actively work off of, so you're going to be retrieving that information all the time, it's going to be connected to your Mac every time you work in Logic Pro, you probably want to skip the 7,200 RPM drive and just get a solid state drive. Because the biggest benefit of a solid state drive is that there are no moving pieces. There's nothing mechanical about it. It's electronic, and thus the read and write speeds are faster than a spinning disk drive. Solid state drives write information electronically. There's a series of cells, and it uses electricity to read and write the information. They're pretty awesome. And if this is your active working drive, that's the biggest pro, is to use a solid state drive so you don't run into these bottlenecks of mechanical speeds. Now, the biggest con of a solid state drive is the fact that they tend to be more expensive. They tend to be pricier as compared to the spinning disk drive equivalent. However, take that with a grain of salt because the price on storage is always going down and the amount of storage you get for the same price is always going up. So by the time you watch this video, you might be able to get so much storage for a solid state drive for very little. But in my mind, the best reason for each option, spinning disk drive, hard disk drive, or solid state drive is if you're looking for an archiving and backing up drive, hard disk drive is probably your best option. If you're looking for an active drive to work from, solid state drive, probably your best option. And keep in mind as well that if you're in the process of backing up and archiving, if you're working on your files, your projects from your Mac, you want to have at least one other storage system to back up to, so a hard disk drive. But if you're working on an external drive for your active projects, that's one external drive. You probably want to get another external drive for backing up the first drive. So a solid state drive, spinning disk drive. So I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, please be sure to check out the description below for that link for any information on future-proofing, file management, versioning of your Logic Pro projects and files. I'm releasing something next week. So thank you again. This is Chris from Logic Pro Rules, and I'll talk to you later. Take care.